Welcome to Creators by Moonlight. Real conversations with content creators.
Rohini Devasher is an artist from Delhi, India. Her artwork manifests itself in many forms and is often inspired by science and nature. In this interview, she talks about the struggle to get started in the field, many of the interesting projects she's undertaken, and what she sees next for the art world.
My name is Rohini Devasher, and I am an artist based in India. I grew up in Delhi, and I live now in a suburb in the neighboring state of Uttar Pradesh. So I live in Noida, which is sort of part of the National Capital Region. So I grew up in Delhi, which is is the capital of India. It's the large, chaotic, crazy city. Delhi is very big. So Delhi also has a lot of really interesting history. It's a very layered city. So Delhi has many Delhis, I would say. Delhi has Old Delhi, which is the older part of the city, which is where you will find a lot of the older markets. But it has, the most beautiful monuments, which are a legacy of the Mughals. Then, of course, we have a very large colonial history. I mean, the British, it was the capital of the city. So there's a large part of Central and South Delhi, which was all planned during the British reign. So architecturally as well, Delhi is very, very complex. And historically, of course, Delhi is very rich. It is very layered. It's complicated, it's difficult, it's extreme, ranges of heat, just in terms of we have almost 9 months of pretty brutal summers. And then we have 3 months of this year, like for instance, has been really cold. So Delhi is a city of extremes as well. And in terms of the people, I think people come from all over the place, So what I like about Delhi is that it's got quite a wide demographic. People come from everywhere, whereas I feel like maybe some other cities, there's much more of a local, sort of population. But Delhi has a lot of people who come from everywhere. It's a complicated place because, of course, as I said, it's the capital. So politically as well, this is where a lot of battles are fought, and it can be quite a fraught city as well. Childhood was really pretty, normal, wonderful, I think. We lived with my grandparents because my father passed away when I was very young. So my mom was a graphic designer. And I think it's thanks to that a lot of my early childhood, I think, was very creative from the get-go. It was filled with the usual things you would imagine. I have a younger sister. We used to do ride around on bikes every day. We used to the usual things that kids do. I did a lot of drawing. I did a lot of art. I would go and sit and paint the monuments, that kind of thing. And then, mom would take us to all kinds of, children's film festivals. We always visited libraries and borrowed books and films and things like that. So we had a lot of culture growing up as well. My mom is just an amazing woman, and she never told us to do anything except what we wanted to do. So there was absolutely no pressure. It was more sort of trying to figure out what it was. I went to a school in New Delhi, which had art as a subject in the higher grades, which is, I think, rare at the time, which was a while ago now. It's been almost 25 years since I graduated from school. So I was able to take art as a subject in the 11th and 12th grade, which I think is like A levels or O levels. And that, I think, made a big difference because then when I graduated from school, I only applied to colleges that were offering a creative, sort of degree. So I applied to art college. I applied to design college. I actually got accepted to the same college my mom went to.
With a supportive upbringing and a basic background in the arts, Rohini decided to pursue them as a career. But she eventually realized that formal training does not translate to instant success.
I went to a college in Delhi, which is called the Delhi College of Art. And it's a comparatively conservative school in the sense that, it's much more focused on technique. It's very geared towards skill. And I met an amazing group of, artists, friends who I know today who continue to be a really, important part of my life. And it was just the most blissful 4 years. I loved it. I did really well. The coming down to earth after that was a bit brutal, I have to say, because it didn't prepare you for anything. So all you have is all this skill, but there was nothing to put it to words. You know what I mean? There was no focus on research. It was always about the end product. It wasn't so much about what went before. So then for 3 years, I just took a break. I worked in a gallery. I worked in, a bunch of, I did research projects. I wrote for other researchers. I wrote for art historians, stuff like that, just to try and figure out what was happening, what's going on. And I started working just on small projects at a print studio, an etching studio in New Delhi, which unfortunately has since closed down a while ago. So I continued to do that, and it felt to me like it made sense if I was to do an MA, which I knew I wanted to do it towards something that was more technical. So I applied for an MA in printmaking to the UK, and I went to the Winchester School of Art, and I feel like that was probably there were two phases where I feel like the work or my practice has shifted dramatically. One was definitely the MA, because there, of course, everything was a large part of your degree credit was research. What you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing, and that kind of thing. So that 1 year was really, really amazing. Winchester's a really small little city, and it's a perfect little, it's a very sort of picture postcard kind of thing. And because it was such a small, tight-knit group of people, it became family. I mean, I think, that initial anxiety of leaving home, which happens, of course, homesickness, was about a week, maybe, something like that, maybe a little less. But after that, it was just, it was fantastic. I loved every minute of it. I was very sad when I had to leave. I extended, after the MA finished, which was about just longer than a year, I spent 3 months in Scotland on a residency at a print studio, which was another amazing adventure. And then I came back in 2005. But yeah, it was fantastic. It was a great experience. Also, because, as I said, it made you think about why you do what you do. It made you, in terms of my own practice, it made me really look deep. And I started to explore the ideas of pattern, which I had been already doing, but not really going deeper than that. So a lot of the work that I do now is still drawing on the base of the MA in printmaking, because I started to work a lot with stacking and iteration. So essentially, if you think about printmaking, whether it's on a stone, on a screen, or on a plate, like in etching, a steel plate or a copper plate, the idea is that you can make multiples of the same image, right? So you have an image on a plate, and then you will be able to make multiples. But I always found that sort of, perfection very stressful, honestly. So I was much more interested in what would happen if you kept using that plate as a kind of block and you kept building surfaces with that. So this sort of interest in complexities and the emergence of chaos, or rather the emergence of pattern out of chaos, began with the MA, began with working with many kinds of surfaces and materials, which was paper, cloth, screen printing. I didn't do much etching. I did a lot of screen printing, and I first started to work with digital print in the UK. I came back, and I think within a couple of months of that, I started working at an art space in Delhi, which is the second sort of pivotal moment. It's called Khoj International Artist Association. It's now just called Khoj Studios. Khoj means to search. It's a it's a word that means to search, to look for. And it started out as an artist-led initiative. And it's essentially, at the time, which was 2005, so it's been a while. At the time, it was a small studio space in the heart of Delhi. And it was run by artists, for artists, where they would do really interesting experimental art. It was all on, cutting edge. We're talking at that time, performance, public art, community-based art projects, art and science, that kind of stuff. So I worked as part of the staff for about 6 years, and I did everything from education and outreach. I worked on publications, programming, fundraising. And then gradually I started to do my own work as well. Because, when you're around so many artists, because Khoj would invite artists from all over the world with a focus on the global south. So that would be Africa, South Asia, etc., which meant that, you're meeting artists who are working with material you haven't even thought of before as being material. So it was really, that was the education, that was incredible. It was really an exciting space to be at the time, because it was also, I think, just before the boom, the art boom in India. So there were comparatively few galleries. I would say there were maybe 4 or 5 in Delhi. So Khoj was really, it still is a very exciting space. But at that time, it was, it fulfilled a different sort of function in the infrastructure. Because one of the other things that is very different in India versus, let's say, the UK or Europe or the US is that there is very little or very poor public infrastructure for the arts. So we have a National Gallery of Modern Art, but it's terrible. It's in terrible shape. And the same goes for most of our public funded institutions. There is no public funding for the arts. So everything that happens ends up being in a commercial space like a gallery or, like a privately funded. Now there are far more privately funded collectors who have set up institutions. But then, those are always complicated spaces in their own right. So Khoj has always been really important because it is a not-for-profit space. It raises funding from various, donors, and it always supports really experimental work. So anyway, I worked there for 6 years. And then gradually from being a full-time staff member, I cut it down. My boss was amazing. Pooja Sood is the most amazing powerhouse of a woman. I slowly cut it down to like 3 days a week and then 2 days a week. And then I was working mostly part-time because it became, quite hard to do my own work and work full-time at Khoj. Yeah, and I worked there till 2011, and then my daughter was born. And then it was like, okay, so now I absolutely have to choose. So it has to be my practice, which isn't going anywhere. Obviously, my daughter's not going anywhere. So then, it just was a very organic time, right? It was the right time to just say bye-bye to Khoj. And I did. So I think in 2011, I actually I was on my own as a solo practitioner. I had a salary from the organization, which makes a big difference. So the advantage also is that I think I met my gallerist in 2007 or 6, I think. Also, while I was working at Khoj in the studios, doing whatever I was doing. And this young gallerist had walked in and she met Pooja, who was the director of Khoj. And she had just set up her gallery in Bombay and I just liked her energy. So I made a CD of my work and I just handed it to her before she left. And then she emailed me back and said, okay, we're doing a summer show and can you send us something? So that's how that happened. And she's still my gallerist today and she's amazing. Her name is Shri Banerjee Goswami and she runs a really fabulous space in Mumbai, which is called Project 88. So I had that conversation with her. So I did have a gallery and I'd had a solo in 2009. But yeah, it was nerve-wracking because it meant that now you're sort of, to an extent, at the mercy of the market. But I was also married by then, which also means that I had some, financial stability. And that's a huge thing in the art world because a lot of it is it's a very insecure space financially.
Rohini's focus on science and the natural world has taken her to interesting places and yielded some interesting experiences while pursuing her art.
I think I'm interested in the ways in which nature as a construct keeps shifting and our relationship to it. And then by extension, our relationship to the planet, the way that we frame the planet and then the way that in turn frames our own, sort of experience of it. And I'm interested in, how do you look at these questions? So I'm interested in applying speculative perspectives, fictional perspectives, scientific frames, so there are different ways in which I approach different kinds of bodies of work. So for instance, at the moment, I'm working on two bodies of work, one of which, in fact, I was on a ship. I was on an oil tanker for 26 days. There are these two curators based in New York, and then they had seen my work at the Frieze Art Fair, and they run the residency that this was part of. It's called the Owner's Cabin. So they invited me and they said, this is something you want to do? And I was like, yes, please. That was an experience. Oh my God. I feel like that was life-changing in many, many ways because you get to see the planet in a way that I think is just, I've never seen no light pollution, in the ocean. We crossed the Pacific from Fiji to Samoa to Singapore. I really felt a sense of loss when I disembarked in Singapore because it was such a strange, time also. You don't have any internet, you don't have any real contact with anybody else, and it ends up being just everybody on board. And then, it was just, you set up your little routines and you have your little time for when you're going to go and have chai or tea on the bridge with the officers or whatever it is. So it was really special. Quite apart, of course, from just the physical experience of seeing the planet that way. I realized, or I didn't realize, that there's no light pollution at all. So there was no light pollution. The ships run in complete darkness. So it was actually the best space for photography. So I captured for me, I was thrilled. The most amazing pictures of the Milky Way, because we were in the South Pacific and we were there in June, May and June, which is Milky Way season. So we had the Milky Way arching overhead every night. It was just spectacular. And then during the day, the color of the water shifting from turquoise when we were in the Torres Straits to got almost midnight black blue when we were at the depths, 14,000 feet in the Pacific. It was a bit freaky in the beginning. Like, it took me a while to be able to sleep properly, I have to say. It's a little unnerving in the beginning, but you get used to it, yeah. I'm interested in these kinds of fields, the field as an idea, the field as a source of collecting material, the sky as the field, the ocean as the field. There are lots of different sorts of ways in which I look at the world that we inhabit and the natural world and our relationship to it. And I am an amateur astronomer. And the strange thing is that for about 10 years, it was just a hobby. It was just something that I would do on a Sunday. We would just meet at the planetarium, or we would do observations and star parties and things. But about 12 years ago, it suddenly has come full circle. And now it's a big part of my work. It's a big part of the work that I do. And all of that was also because of a stellar event. It was a total solar eclipse, which happened on the 22nd of July, 2009. And it was supposed to be a really spectacular event because it was one of the deepest totalities. That means it was almost 6 minutes of totality. And that's the longest of this century. So if you think about it, most total solar eclipses, the duration of totality, which is when the moon completely covers the disk of the sun, is usually anywhere between 30 seconds to 2 or 3 minutes. That's about the range. But this was supposed to be 6 minutes. So I had flown down with, everybody had gone to Patna, which is in the state of Bihar, to see this eclipse. And we were on the rooftop, and it's this early morning eclipse. So we stayed up all night. And then by about 5 o'clock, we realized that the clouds are coming in. And sure enough, when totality hits, it's completely occluded and it starts to rain. The energy on that roof, that experience was really something else, because there was pitch black. It was pouring. It was cold. People were screaming because, of course, there's only hysteria or, there's joy and tears. There's nothing in between. There's no middle ground in a total solar eclipse. But I was like, there was that moment when you're suddenly aware of your physical position on the planet. You know what I mean? Like, you are on a sphere in space in between these two bodies that are, and you're watching, you're the third body and you're observing the sun and the moon in action. Shortly thereafter, I came back to Delhi, and there was another art space. Well, it's a research space in Delhi, which is called CSDS, which is the Center for Developing Societies. And they had put a call out looking for artists, or anyone, actually, artists, scientists, dancers, anyone to look at the city of Delhi as a studio. So I just wrote a one-page proposal saying I wanted to try and understand why amateur astronomers do what they do, as a way of understanding why I do what I do as well. Why am I drawn to the night sky? And that project is still ongoing now, and it's been amazing, because it's strange how things that you don't really necessarily think of as being part of work come into work. It becomes something. I think if you love something, there's a way in which you can fold it into your work as well. So that's sort of what's happened with that whole body of work, which is now almost 12 years old.
A few of Rohini's most prominent projects are Atmospheres, a new perspective inspired by a classic NASA photograph, and Glass House Deep, an exploration of some of the smallest creatures in the ocean.
One is called Atmospheres, and it's a single channel video with sound. It's about 6.5 minutes. And this was the result of a visit to an observatory with another amateur astronomer, Ajay Talwar. And I had traveled with Ajay. I've traveled with him a lot, and he's an amazing, amazing astrophotographer. He's an amazing educator. He's just a fabulous, fabulous human being. So we went to an observatory which is in the south of India, and it's called the Gauri Bidnoor Radio Telescope Array. And it's a really amazing, amazing observatory. It's basically got a bunch of radio telescopes, but there are two different kinds of radio telescopes. So one of them are just these dipoles, so that they're like, they're basically long wooden poles which are dug into the ground. And then the telescopes are just these very thin black wires that are strung along them. And then they also have newer radio heliographs, which are these incredibly strange, beautiful, metallic telescopes which study the corona of the sun. So I went to this site with Ajay, and I got there, and I was, it's one of those things where what I love about travel and about these sort of expeditions, if you like, is that you have to go with no expectations in mind. So I go to this site and I was completely the only image online. I had a very different image in my head of what the observatory would look like, because it was obviously an image that had been taken from the air when the array had just been laid out. But when I went there, it had been overgrown because, of course, it's in a lush part of South India, so you can't really get a sense of the scale of these poles extending into space. So the result is a bit like you're walking into a tenting, sort of like, where a circus has come down, but they haven't removed the poles. You know what I mean? It was a bit like, okay. But then, so we spent 3 days there, and Ajay had this fisheye lens with him. So he wasn't using it at one point, and I asked if I could borrow it. And I just was shooting the sky at different points with the camera pointed up at the zenith with my, at different points in the array. And then when I came back home and I looked at this material, it was one of those amazing moments of wow, because I realized what happens is with the fisheye lens, of course, it turns everything, it gives you a 360-degree panorama, right? If you're pointing up at the sky. So it makes the sky into a disk. It makes the sky into this amazing sphere. And it was like the image that it brought to my mind immediately was, what is it called? The image of the Earth first taken from space in 1972 by the crew of Apollo. The blue marble, that one image which, at the end of the Cold War sort of transformed people's imaginations and made them rally around this image, instead of the mushroom cloud. And the idea of one planet is still at the forefront of the Anthropocene argument or climate change, of course, because it is one planet. So what happened finally in the work is that it was like a way of looking at our planet again, but from our perspective on the ground. So what you see is the sky, but slowly, sort of bisected and trisected by these very thin radio telescopes, and sometimes with these incredibly strange and beautiful radio heliographs on the side. Yeah, I think that it's one of those pieces that I feel really worked well and has become more and more significant for me, as well as in the way other people read it, is because there's this sort of sense that maybe one of the best ways is to actually look from where we are, because that perspective is really interesting, because NASA published another image of the blue marble in 2012. So the image of the first blue marble was shot in 1972 by the crew of Apollo 17. And it was taken from a distance of approximately 29,000 kilometers from the Earth's surface. The resulting color-corrected photograph was adjusted, and it's now one of the most accessed images online, right? And in 2012, NASA created a new version of the blue marble, which was photographed by a satellite which orbited the Earth at approximately 930 kilometers above the Earth. Now, obviously, from this distance, it isn't possible to view the planet as a whole, right? You have to go 11,000 kilometers further away before you can see the whole sphere. So this new photograph, which was launched in 2012, was actually a composite, which was assembled from a series of digital images, which is actually a really, really interesting metaphor, I think. So there's a really cool book, How to See the World, by a gentleman called Nicholas Mirzoff. And he talks about how the blue marble is made to seem, as if it's taken from one place in space, but it's not. It's accurate in each detail, but it is false in that it gives the illusion of having been taken from a specific place at one moment in time. So this tile rendering is a standard means of constructing digital imagery, but it is a good metaphor for how the world is visualized today. We assemble a world from pieces, assuming that what we see is both coherent and equivalent to reality, until we discover it is not. That's the end of the quote. So I think what my work, Atmospheres, does is that it offers the perspective that the other way to look at a whole is from much closer, which is from the Earth. So that's that piece. And then the other work which I wanted to tell you about is called Glasshouse Deep, which I just made, I was going to say this year, but of course it's now last year. Glasshouse Deep was commissioned by the Busan Sea Art Festival, the Busan Biennial for the Busan Sea Art Festival, which happened last year. So the other part of my research looks a lot at, processes of emergence. I'm really interested in pattern, self-organization of pattern. And a lot of the work that I do involves video feedback, which is, of course, a super cool thing, which has been around forever. And video feedback, for those who may not know, is it's sort of like the optical equivalent of audio feedback. So when you take a mic and you put it near a speaker, you get that really annoying noise. So it's the same thing with video feedback, except that you plug a camera into a TV and you make the camera look at itself. And if you adjust the settings of the camera and the TV and the ambient light, then you can create the most amazing forms that are generated within the loop, within the machines, between the camera and the TV. And it's really incredible stuff. And anyone, there are DIY tutorials online. The behavior that is generated starts to mimic biological life. You can create cell patterns, tree forms, those kind of snowflakes. It's basically like you can generate fractals. So what I do with a lot of the other work is that I shoot footage like this, I chop it up, and then I stitch it back together into different kinds of assemblages. And the work that I did for Busan, which is called Glasshouse Deep, was building on that, but also looking at diatoms, which were collected by the Korea Institute of Ocean Science and Technology. And diatoms are basically very small phytoplankton. They're really small, and they have the most exquisite skeletal structures. They're made out of glass, they're made out of silica, and they have the most incredible patterns. And they're also called the jewels of the deep. They're also called opals of the deep because they have this amazing chromatic brilliance. So the piece is about 10 minutes, and it's basically sort of a speculative journey into this kind of strange deep, where you're looking at diatoms, but you're also looking at trajectories in space, you're looking at points in space, and then light plays a very important role because on one hand, spectral quality of light induces migration in diatoms, and video feedback also occurs when light is looped between a video camera and a television. So light is a sort of central protagonist.
Rohini describes her current work, her overall professional philosophy, and future trends in the art world.
So I think when I was younger, even I would say 10 years ago, it was looking for inspiration, or it would be triggered by an invitation to an exhibition, for instance, something like that. I think the difference is that now I actively create opportunities to go and look for things. So I do some amount of homework. Some things happen just serendipitously. So the owner's cabin oil tanker residency just happened. And the result of that is a huge, like 2 terabytes of material that I haven't even looked at yet. So some of those things just happen as a result of invitations. But for instance, the piece I'm working on at the moment, it's a project that's called 100,000 Suns. And this was, it's focused on an incredible observatory in the south of India, Kodaikanal Solar Observatory. It's almost 150 years old, and it has one of the oldest archives of the sun. So almost for 115 years, since 1904, every day, weather permitting, the staff at the observatory have taken photographs of the sun. And this archive takes the form of drawings, takes the form of glass plates, photographic plates. It takes the form of C calcium images, H alpha images. So I knew I wanted to go there. So when there was a call for for an application for projects about 3 years ago, I applied with this project. I got that. So it just meant that I made a little expedition around an eclipse. I spent 3 days at the observatory and I collected material. So that's what I'm working on now. So it's a bit of both. Busan was an invitation by the curator who had seen my work with video feedback and said, is this something you want to work with again? And I told her, yes. So she then said, okay, well, how about we connect you with this, amazing scientific institution in Korea? So I think it's both. I think now I'm at the point where I actively do seek also. And then because I think the way that I work, I've realized is I take a while. And very often I have 2 or 3 projects going at the same time, but each of those can take 2 or 3 years to gestate, So I like to collect, sometimes the collecting, and it just stays. It just means its time hasn't come yet. I think I would only say that maybe one of the things I am very interested in with all the work is that I think all of the work, whether it's with video feedback, whether it's drawings, whether it's the work that looks more at the relationship between astronomy and whatever, is looking at making a case for wonder. I feel like the word has lost currency a little bit. And I feel like it's very important because wonder and the line it walks with the strange is really, really interesting, because wonder makes you look at the world anew. Wonder makes you ask the question, it's as if you're looking at the world anew, So I think those are 2 things I'm really interested in. Making things strange and making a case for wonder. I think we're seeing lots of new trends, whether or not they will stay or whether or not there's anything like, I don't understand NFTs at all. at all. Like I don't get it, because as I've been talking to other artists as well who work in the digital, and then as this other artist was explaining to me, he was just saying this whole idea of creating artificial scarcity, right? The whole idea is a meme is meant to go viral. And then you take an NFT and somehow, I don't know, it seems to be completely counterintuitive and working against itself. And at the end of the day, again, I don't get it, because I can own an NFT, but somebody else can right click, download, and own it as well. So I think I'm just a bit leery. I'm a bit suspicious. There is a very interesting link between pandemics and speculative bubbles. So the bubonic plague produced the tulip mania and COVID. And I'm just saying there's some interesting similarities happening here, but I don't know. I think it's one of those things where either I just don't get it. I think I've done a bunch of reading around it. I just don't. I don't see it. I don't see it at all. So maybe it's just a question of waiting. Maybe it's too far ahead of me. I don't know. I think this is the thing, because a lot of the articles I've been reading just in the past week is one of those, I forget the name of which portal, shut down because they're just finding so much fraud, right? So there's so much fake art. So what is stress inducing for someone? I mean, as an artist who tries to keep a fair control on quality, like you want to make sure that the work is seen the right way, that kind of thing. The idea that if you enter this and then suddenly you find your stuff all over the place, because a gallerist who deals with digital art said it's so difficult to litigate. Who do you litigate against? Like how do you even begin? So I think maybe it's time. Either way, I think we'll know what's going on there. So the future, I think, is I think with all things, I think it's just we'll find out. I think the pandemic has shifted things. I think only because I mean, I don't know if it's shifted what art is being produced, but I think it has shifted maybe, hopefully, the way that we engage with the art world. Maybe, I just feel like now one is being, or maybe that's just me, maybe this is cave syndrome. Like, I just feel like one is being much more careful in terms of how you spend your energy. Like there was so much of the pounding of the pavement to go and see shows and that kind of thing. I think that's really fallen through. I think it just depends. No, the way whether audiences are still re-engaging with art, or artists are also just re-engaging with galleries and, that kind of, the museums, for instance. I use Instagram carefully, I would say. I try, and I think I try and share, but it's a tough one. I'd have to say, if they start to put that thing in, as long as it's still within my control, I think I'd be okay with it. But if it means that it does something strange, then no, because I don't want to. Like at the moment, until I understand this stuff better, there's no question of minting NFTs out of my work, because I just I just don't. For instance, somebody I spoke with said, well, you can make an NFT out of this video. And I'm like, well, what happens to it then? Are we talking about a 10-minute NFT? I'm very confused. And they're like, no, but it could be both. And I was like, I don't understand what you're saying. I don't get it. Like, it can be both. It can be a print. It can be a 20-minute film. And it can be, that just seems like, I don't know, a collector's dream and an artist's nightmare. I don't know. It's strange. I don't think I think about anyone except the work when I'm doing it. But once the work is done and it's out there, then if you don't have people write about it, there is no way to share it across, because then otherwise it's limited to whoever's being able to see the work. And especially now, where I've actually not been able to travel. So the work has traveled over the past 2 years. It's been to Busan, it's been to New York. I haven't been. So it's important, to get people. And most of the invitations, I mean, most of them, if it's an institution, then the institution will set up, the press, right? So if it's a show in a gallery, then the gallerist will, the gallery already has a PR link up, and then they send, the information to various publications or to newspapers, and then those journalists will get in touch with you. And I think, the thing is, it's sort of part of the job. It's part of the job is communicating what you're trying to do, but also being the best steward for your own work. So that's why I like to do this, but also I am, we all get burned, and then you realize you really have to sort of either be very clear. I try and do a lot of these on email. And if if we're talking, then okay, I would love to be able to see something maybe. And if that isn't possible, then hopefully at least the conversation didn't raise any red flags in terms of, at least this person is thinking about it. I just feel like, but sometimes even that, you just have to sort of let it slide, but up to a point, I think. But I think it's part of the job. I think you have to be your own best spokesperson for the work. I don't really think of it as selling myself as much as speaking for the work, because sometimes, very often, like I do all my own writing. I write for all the work, I write for all the shows, I write for everything because I know the work best. When someone is able to write for my work, that's great. But I don't wait for someone to do that, because then, you have to get the material out there. And whether people take it on when they see the work is another matter. Then I leave that at the door, but at least I do the writing. I think like those boundaries also shift with time and with place and with age or whatever it is. I just think, because to be honest, even on social media, I am very leery of posting too much information. So if you come to the website, there will be far more text. I don't put too much online because I have a public account. I don't know who's going to be looking, and you're not going to find my sketches there. You're not going to find my notes there. You won't find the books I'm reading there. Because to be honest, that's for people who come to the studio, if they want to come to the studio. That's for people who ask, what are you reading? Because I think it's not a danger thing. It's just a reality that there will always be people who will not be looking out for the best, right? So you just have to keep those lines drawn for yourself. So I post a small amount. I post material that I would be sharing anyway in terms of a press release or something like that. But I don't actually post anything that is in the way of work in progress or anything like that, because you have to create a safe space for yourself and for the work. There is a point at which too much, what's the word? I don't want any inputs at a stage. You see what I mean? Like later is okay, but I'm not looking for that earlier. I think two things: be patient and be kind with yourself. Very important. Be patient and be kind. It does take a while. It's a long road, and it's a long game. It's a long road. It's slightly different for different people. So it is very challenging. It happens to all of us. You see peers or younger people seemingly getting more opportunities. All of those things will happen. But I think you have to have faith in your own practice. I think it's a combination of sort of having faith and also being real. No? So you have to sort of not have an unrealistic expectation of yourself either. But I think kindness is very important. And this applies not only with yourself, but just with the world that you will be inhabiting. So for instance, I always tell younger artists here also that they must work in an art space. Even if it's a short internship, just work in a gallery, work in a not-for-profit, so that you understand the kind of work that goes into making your work possible. You have to know what goes into that. How do you write a proposal? How do you respond to an email politely? How do you frame a budget? So getting work experience on the other side is very important. Otherwise, because I've done that, and lots of us have worked at art spaces, and you remember the artists who were kind, you remember the artists who were not. So I think that is very important. And yeah, I would say these are the three things, and keep at it. Just keep working. The other great thing about the art world is that there are so many art worlds. It's like a multiverse of art worlds. There are art worlds within art worlds, and there will be a world for everyone, including someone who just paints cats or someone who paints flowers. There are worlds within worlds within worlds. And as long as you go out there, you will find it. Unless you don't want to, which is also fine. That's also fine. But you have to keep at it, and you have to just maybe find those experiences, maybe figure out what it is. The thing is, though, it keeps shifting, and you will keep finding new ways of inspiration. I think it's just continuing. You have to keep doing. The doing is a daily thing. It's a daily thing. Like I'm in the studio every day. Because my studio is at home, I'm very often in the studio on a Saturday and a Sunday as well for a period of time if I have to. So it's a daily practice, and it happens slowly. Doesn't mean you're productive every day, but you have to keep at it. And then eventually it'll either come, or as I said, it won't come. And you'll know when that moment has or hasn't arrived. And then you will have to see what has to happen. You know what I mean?
Thanks for listening to Creators by Moonlight. Email the show at creatorsbymoonlight@gmail.com and follow the show on social @Creators by Moonlight.